It's finally here, 100,000 subscribers. I posted my first video almost exactly 2 years ago, and time has flown by. A huge thanks to everyone who's helped me get here, from watching videos, leaving comments, supporting through memberships and Patreon, all of it. Thank you so much for helping me get here. This is a long video, so I've included timestamps for you to skip around to the questions that interest you most. Let's get right to it. Cynic Viper asks, do you have a taste for luxury and extravagance? And if not, was it always that way, or has something influenced you? When I was about 18 years old, I started working in the car business and made incredible money for a kid. And a lot of people around me had the philosophy that you should buy expensive things to show that you're successful. So I went out and bought a very expensive suit. I bought a Movado watch, Versace wallet and cufflinks, the whole 9 yards. Basically blew a whole month's worth of income on an outfit. Fast forward a month or two later, I realized I didn't even care about all that stuff. Like a wallet's a wallet to me. They all do the same thing, even if one costs 10 times what it should. People didn't really treat me differently because I had expensive things on. And so, and more importantly, it didn't make me feel any different. So I would rather have the money in the bank than have it, you know, displayed on my wrist and losing money. So in that sense, do I have a taste? I don't anymore, but I did at one point. And then I realized it's just not something that is important to me. That's not to say that I look down on people that do. Everybody's got their own thing. If it makes you happy, go for it. For me personally, it does absolutely nothing whatsoever. Kyle Peterson asks, you talk a lot about kids and family, be cool to know about them and general stuff. Yeah, so I've got a wife of about 5, oh geez, I'm gonna get hit for this. I think we've been married since 17, what are we, 6? Yeah, it's about 6 years, and we've got 2 kids, almost 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And what do they think about YouTube stuff? And I know your wife does some editing. Yeah, I recently started teaching her how to edit, and she's really enjoying it. So she used to be in a line of work that was very detail-oriented, and so I figured she would enjoy editing, and so far she has, and I'm hoping to teach her more, and maybe she can do more complex things than just editing Let's Plays. What do they think about YouTube? It's hard to say. They're very supportive, and so I don't know that I would necessarily get a truthful answer from them just because they would always be positive. But I think in general, they are supportive, especially with how quickly things have grown. I think if I was still in the 1,000 sub range, you know, 2 years after starting, it might be a different conversation, but now, you know, we're able to hit 100,000 within 2 years, which in terms of YouTube is quite fast. So I think in that sense, it's, you know, all's good. And then also any other pets besides the bird, I do not, but I've had plenty of animals. I've had a lot of cats, a lot of dogs. I've had a duck before. This is when I was really young. A duck, lizards, frogs, all kinds of animals. Yeah, I love animals. Very, very, very cool. Blasian King asks, do you watch horror movies and what's your favorite? So I personally don't enjoy watching horror movies. My wife loves them. So I do end up watching them once in a while, not because of my personal preferences though. And if I had to choose a favorite, it is probably something old like The Ring, the one that was ported over into English. You know, the girl comes crawling through the screen. And then that was actually that was probably one of the few that actually scared me. For the most part, I can't get into horror movies because my mind can't stop thinking, oh, this is BS. This is not real. You know, if it was maybe a little bit more realistic and plausible, then I would get into it. But my brain doesn't allow me to believe in that stuff. I can't really get in the mindset, and so I can't really enjoy horror movies for the most part. In general, I'm not a fun person to watch horror movies with because I usually end up rolling my eyes, laughing, or making comments like, oh, this is, you know, this is not accurate because of this would never happen, or this violates this law of physics. I'm not a fun person to watch movies with in general, but so that, yeah. The Clown9 asks, tell us something about you that shows us who you are and what interests you. That's a really tough question to answer. So when I get interested in something, I will usually dedicate almost all of my focus on that 1 or 2 things that I'm interested in at the time, and everything else just kind of falls by the wayside. So it might make sense to just talk about some of the things that have done that to me in my life. I know when I was younger, I was really heavily into video games, and that actually has never changed. There's never been a point when I wasn't interested in video games. Sports, I played all kinds of sports throughout all my life, did all the usual stuff, you know, basketball, soccer, track and field, all of them. Then as I got older, I played soccer through high school and college, and then I got into Muay Thai and boxing. I did that also in college, outside of college. Those consumed my life. Skateboarding, I did that for quite a while as well. When I was a little younger, I got into music. I played piano, so I did that. That consumed my life for a couple years as well, and then I just kind of stopped. Several other random ones, like I got into woodworking. I did that for a couple years. I made a 6-foot fully functioning trebuchet out of wood. That was pretty cool. And then as I've gotten older, I tried to pick things that interest me that I can also do for business. So for example, I was interested in real estate a lot, and fortunately it's one of those things where you can get paid well doing it. So that worked out pretty well, but I never was able to shake the video game habit. And so I decided to try and turn it into a business that can actually pay me. So here we are. So I hope that answers some of it. Yeah, I'm kind of all over the place. I've been interested in a lot of different things. There's so many things that I'm interested in, and I only have so much time to really explore them and give them the justice they deserve. So I try not to get into too many things anymore. I'm a little bit more cautious when I expand my horizons, but hopefully that gives you some insight. Hugh Janus asks, how old are you and do you like to watch any sports? So I'm in my late 30s and I don't really like watching sports that much. The only one that I watch, I would say right now, is combat sports. I watch a little bit of boxing if it's a big fight, but mostly I stick to MMA and maybe a little bit of Muay Thai. I'm generally of the opinion that I would much rather participate than watch. So, oh, you know, actually now that I think about it, if you consider esports, I do like to watch the Dota 2 internationals when that comes around. I used to play Dota 2 a lot, and I don't really follow the players that much, but I do like to watch the high-level players go at it. I think it's really entertaining, and it has the same feeling of, you know, like watching the Super Bowl or something, but it's a little bit more personal because I'd rather watch video games than watch football. Justin Alexei asks, where does your passion for medieval tactics and history come from? I don't know that I have a passion specifically for medieval tactics and history. I would say just history in general. I will typically go through phases. Like I went through a Civil War phase for quite a while, a World War II phase. I've gone through medieval phases. I've gone through Dark Age phases, etc., etc. It just depends on kind of what's interesting me at that time. And a lot of that has to do with the video games that are out. So I will typically play a video game because it's interesting to me, the game mechanics, but it'll be centered around a time period that I maybe don't know a whole lot about. And as I get into playing it, I start to get these questions in my head like, oh, I wonder how that actually worked in real life, or what people were involved in this, or they'll introduce a character in the game, but they'll only give you, you know, one or two pieces of information. And then I start to research more on it. I'll either watch documentaries or I'll go on the internet and look at, you know, research papers and whatnot and try and find out more about them. And it just kind of slowly expands from there. So I would say that's probably where that comes from. It's just an interest in things that have happened in the past, all the way back to prehistory. I mean, I watch all sorts of history stuff. So hopefully that answers that. Deadpool asks, how many languages do you speak? And is there any language you're currently learning or plan to learn? So I speak, obviously, English. I wouldn't say fluent, but I used to be pretty close to being fluent in Spanish. And then I was trying to learn Mandarin Chinese for I don't know, maybe half a year or so. And that one kind of went by the wayside. In the family that I married into, they mostly speak Cantonese, Chinese. And so I have been learning that lately because my kids are trying to learn that. And so obviously it makes sense to do that. But yeah, I would say mostly Spanish. Puedo hablar mejor que aprender. I feel very comfortable speaking Spanish, but like I said, I'll definitely mess up a lot of words. I'll probably mess up a lot of conjugations and whatnot. And as far as languages that I'm planning to learn, that's a tough one, man. There's a lot of languages I wanted to learn. Like I started to learn German at some point. There's a bunch of other languages that I know like maybe 10 or 15 words from, but I wouldn't say I speak the language, you know, just a few one-offs. Yeah, it's a matter of time. I just don't have time to do it. But yeah, I would love to learn a bunch of languages, but probably won't happen just based on what I've got going on. So Stephen Moon asks, what's your knowledge on World War II? That is one of the topics that I was heavily interested in for quite a while in my life. I watched quite a few documentaries on it, so I would say I have, just in general on most topics, I have a very wide base of knowledge that doesn't go particularly deep. So I'll have a very firm grasp of the high level events, what order they happened in, some basic dates. But if you were to ask me all the specific details of you know, let's say Operation Overlord, if you'd ask me, you know, who was planning that, all the specific intricacies, anything deeper than the surface level stuff, I probably wouldn't be able to recall most of that information. I generally get more pleasure from knowing a wide variety than knowing one or two topics and knowing them incredibly well. So my brain works in the way that I get bored with things pretty quickly, so I like to hop from topic to topic. So that doesn't really allow me to really become an expert in any one field when it comes to history topics. So Novus Ordo asks, when did you start playing video? I can't even remember. It was probably when I was 1 or 2 before I even had a memory. Ever since I can remember, I had always been playing video games. My first experience that I do remember playing video games was on a regular Nintendo, the NES, and I remember playing Mario and Duck Hunt, and we had that little, I don't remember what it was called. I think it's like Gizmo or something. It was like like a little robot that would rotate, and he had hands. He could pick up these little spinning discs or something like that. So that's like the earliest memory that I have of video games. But I'm sure it was before that even. Yeah, I love video games. Always been playing them. And why do I play the games that I do? I just pick stuff that interests me. I generally like things that are a bit more complex. I have always been interested in strategy games, but I also like first-person shooters, things that I generally don't play a whole lot of. I don't play, I guess what you would call button mashers. I don't even know what the proper term for them, but like Street Fighter, Tekken, I'm horrible at those. I don't really play those too much, and I don't really enjoy them particularly. Maybe because I'm terrible at them. I generally don't play a whole lot of AAA titles anymore either, just because I feel like a lot of them lack depth. They have a lot of good graphical fidelity, but the gameplay, the story, a lot of that stuff is just lacking, and I don't really enjoy it. I've really gotten heavily into the indie games. So terrible graphics, but really good gameplay loop. I'm all for it. I could spend, you know, a couple thousand hours into them. How did you and your wife meet? Online. Who is your hero? I don't really have a hero. That's a tough one. Yeah, I've thought about that in the past. Not really. I mean, it can change from time to time. There's not one specific person that I can look back and think, oh, I want to be just like them, or I want to take... I generally will try and pick one or two aspects of people that I really admire and try and integrate them into my life, but I don't know that I could really narrow it down to one specific person necessarily. And what is the best soda pop, and why is it Dr. Pepper? I actually don't drink soda. I hate soda. I pretty much drink water. Once in a while, I'll drink like a fruit juice or something, but yeah, for the most part, I'm a water guy. Very boring. Mr. Dad asked, what's it like being low-key kind of YouTube famous? I definitely am not interested in a lot of attention. I don't like the idea of being famous. I'm very introverted, and I like my alone time. I generally don't like to be bothered when I'm working, and I work a lot. So either I'm spending time with the kids or I'm doing that. So outside of that, yeah, I have no interest in being famous. So if I did at some point become famous, it would probably be a negative, and I would not enjoy it. The other half of the question is 100K subs enough to retire from the 9-to-5 grind? For me personally, it would not have been enough. No, but that's kind of a loaded question. So 100K subs doesn't really tell you anything about how much income a channel can make. It's all about the views that you get, and it's all about the niche that you're in. Basically that tells you how much each view pays you. Some niches pay really good, and some niches pay horribly. Like certain video games and certain, you know, kids content can pay 20 cents per 1,000 views. I'm currently getting paid about I would say between 250 and 350 per 1,000 views. And then there are some finance channels that can make upwards of, you know, $20 to $40 per 1,000 views. So the gamut is massive. So if your 100K channel is making, say, 500,000 views a month, and you get paid $3,000 per million, that means you'd be making $1,500 on 500,000 views. Probably not enough for most people to retire from a 9-to-5. If you're making minimum wage to begin with, then it's probably a lot easier to replace that income. If you're coming from, you know, some kind of white collar job and you're making, you know, 100K a year, you would probably need quite a bit more than that. You know, maybe 2 to 3 million views per month at a $3 to $4 per 1,000, I would say. So yeah, long story short, no, it's probably not enough. Merc Agent Vinny asks, did you go to college? If you did, what for, and did you graduate? So I'm actually going to backtrack just a little bit and talk about high school leading up into college, because that might help it make a little bit more sense. In high school, I really wanted to work on something video game related, and so I actually picked computer programming, and I was going to go to ITT Tech. It's just a tech school where you get certifications from, but it's not like a 4-year institution. And my piano teacher at the time convinced me to not do that because it would have been a huge mistake. So glad I took her advice. And I actually wanted to do music after that, got accepted into a music program, and then backed out before that started. You're probably noticing a trend here. So then I ended up working for about 3 to 4 years outside of high school, and then I went back to school eventually, and I enrolled in the junior college, the local junior colleges here. And I knew I wanted to do something science related, so I was initially studying physics and chemistry. I ended up getting accepted into UC Berkeley and transferring up there for physics and mathematics. I took some upper division math classes, and it was an absolute nightmare. Anybody that can do upper division math classes has my absolute respect. I didn't have a clue what was going on in that class, in any of those classes. So I backed out, and I ended up changing that to astrophysics, not particularly because I was interested in astrophysics, but because there was a lot of crossover between the courses that I was taking already. And so I really only needed, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 more classes to get the dual major. And the only reason I was doing the dual major is because as a transfer student, they kick you out after 2 years. But if you're doing 2 majors, you get to stay a little bit longer, and I really wanted to stay as long as I could. So that's kind of the reasoning behind that. Now, that said, I did graduate, not by much though. I gotta be honest, Berkeley kicked my butt. I went from, you know, being a 4.0 student where I was at in the junior colleges to being a, you know, 2 to 2.5 GPA. It was horrible, man. I was very, very much out of my element. I was always the least intelligent kid in all the groups that I was in. And I don't know if it's fair to say least intelligent. I was definitely not prepared for Berkeley coming from a junior college. And so I had to do a lot of catch up. And to make it worse, I was playing a lot of video games at the time. And so I was not putting 100% effort into it. So it was like a compound effect. But like anything in life, I figured out a way to get it done. It wasn't pretty, but I graduated. I do have a degree. It's actually still sitting in my safe. I haven't even opened it because I've never once used it. And I don't regret going to school. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of important life lessons that I learned there, but yeah, absolutely not necessary. But yeah, hopefully that was an interesting story. Shrinit asks, what was your favorite course in school? I would rather lead with my least favorite. So I didn't like quantum mechanics, specifically because of the mathematics required to understand that subject. So the concepts are actually not that difficult to understand, and I really enjoyed the subject, but the mathematics needed to fully understand and complete test questions was just a little bit outside of my grasp, and I struggled a lot with it. I failed the first semester of quantum, but once I understood it, it was not too bad. But yeah, that was probably my least favorite experience. All the other courses, I can't really think of a favorite. They were all interesting in their own way. Electromagnetism really stands out to me as one that fascinates me. And then in terms of astrophysics, a lot of the courses were focused on stars and their makeup and kind of that relationship between how big something is, the type of light and waves that they give off relative to, you know, how much mass they have, all that stuff. It's just such an interesting topic. So yeah, I couldn't say a favorite. They were all pretty interesting, but quantum mechanics kicked my butt, and I hated it for a while. And are there any skills or knowledge that you learned that you are still using regularly to this day? Yeah, from a technical side, there's definitely nothing in there that I learned that I need to know for regular day-to-day work. I would say if I went into research, maybe, but you know, outside of that, probably not. There are some basic concepts that apply to anywhere in life, and I think are very useful. So the problem solving skills, being able to model data, is very important. Actually, I use it a lot in my YouTube videos, my process. So being very structured, collecting data, kind of knowing what questions to ask when you don't know the answer, but you kind of know what you need to know. So I would say just things that revolve around that. I would say just general problem solving skills. M Trip asks, what's your work profession? So I've had quite a few jobs in my days. I worked in the restaurant business for a while. I worked in car sales. I did real estate sales, kind of. I've done loan origination, like mortgage loans. I've done a lot. I would say the vast majority of my profession was in the car business. Right out of high school, I sold cars for about 3 years as a salesperson. Then I went back to school, and after I graduated, I went back into the car business. I did sales for a little bit, but then I was promoted to management. So then a lot of my time was I still sold cars, but I also hired and trained and managed my own sales team. Then I took over the internet department. I got promoted to finance a little bit after that. So I kind of dabbled into a lot of things, and I would say my analysis skills aren't specifically from anything that I've done professionally. It's definitely come from my schooling. But one point that I want to bring up about that, so I was able to apply the stuff that I learned in school in the job that I had. And as you can imagine, the car business isn't necessarily filled with people that have college educations. And so I was able to provide that value to my boss, and it made it really easy for me to get promoted. So if you're ever in a job that you really enjoy and you want to do well and move up, always try and do more than you're asked to do or more than you're paid to do, providing value to your boss. And that's definitely one good way to get ahead in life. It really helped me out a lot. So Craftmaster asks, what was your career before YouTube? And I kind of answered this previously. It was mostly in the car business as a salesperson and then as a manager. And why did you decide to switch over? So I knew that I wanted to make a bunch of money as quickly as possible so that I could funnel that money into my own businesses. I knew early on that I didn't want to work for other people for very long. I knew I had to do it early on for me to do what I wanted to do. It was kind of like the shortcut. And so when I worked in the car business, I saved every penny that I could. I mean, I was showing up to work in a beat up pickup truck that was worth less than the clothes that I had on. Like I had a pretty nice suit on, and it was worth more than the truck. It was like a 94 pickup. AC didn't work. Radio was stolen. I had to open the car door from the inside because the outside handle was broken off. I mean, it was just a total beater. And how is the pay different? So I would say in the car business, I was making anywhere from 10 to 15K. A lot of it's commission based. So, you know, on a bad month, maybe 10, and on a really good month, maybe upwards of 15. And working for yourself, it's actually really, really hard to make that much money. It didn't take me that long, but it was definitely difficult to do. I didn't entirely replace my income. I would say I got to about 70 to 80% of replacement on my income, and then I quit. Definitely well worth it. The extra money is not worth it. And you can definitely make more working for yourself if you have enough time and you put enough effort into it. But you know, right off the bat, it's definitely not easy. You know, making 10 grand at a job is actually not that difficult. Making 10 grand with your own business is exponentially harder. However, going from 10 grand to 100 grand is actually way easier working for yourself. So there's different economies of scale there. Obviously, I haven't gotten to the 100 grand part working for myself, but that, you know, at some point would be kind of cool. And how does the stress compare? Yeah, that's I would say that's a really good point to bring up. You're asking very good questions here. So the way I look at it is there's two kinds of stress. There's the stress that will shorten your lifespan. They're kind of like the ones that lead you to depression. And then there's the other kinds of stresses, which are actually very productive and fruitful, and they can bring about a lot of positivity. Working in the car business definitely had more of the negative stress. So working incredibly long hours, I would work anywhere from 12 to 15-hour days, no days off each month. If there was a holiday, I would obviously have to take it off because the dealership was closed. But I pretty much, I could probably count on one hand how many days off I took in that, you know, it was about 4-year period, and I just worked myself to the bone. And then there's the other kind of stress where it kind of wakes you up in the morning because you're excited to get started and working on a problem. So for example, when you're trying to build a business, there's problems you run into and you really want to come up with solutions, and then implementing the solutions, and you don't know what's going to happen. So it's a little stressful, but it's kind of like it gets your creative juices going. It gets you excited to really approach and tackle problems, especially new problems. You know, if you're always tackling new things as opposed to just doing the same thing day in and day out, that's a really good kind of stress for me. I feel like it's a healthy stress. So I try to do as much as I can to eliminate that negative stress and bring about the positive stress. Now, one word of caution. Now, working for yourself, you can definitely get a lot of the negative stress. I'll give you one example. I started to do some out-of-state investing, and I made a bad business partnership decision that cost me about $500,000, which is, for me, is an incredible amount of money. I'm definitely not a rich person, so that was a significant portion of my personal wealth gone in like the blink of an eye. And so there was a point where I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to pay bills, if I was going to have to foreclose some properties or do any of that stuff. And so that was incredibly stressful. There's other things where, you know, you want to figure out a solution for like a parking lot problem. Then you kind of think outside the box. That's a good kind of stress. So like I said, both types of stresses are present, whether you're working a job, whether you're working for yourself, going to school, any of that. So, you know, for me, I try to build businesses that bring the good kind of stress and minimize the negative stress. Arct asks, how many rentals did it take to support your family pursuing this goal? That's a tough question to answer in the way that you're expecting. I would say there are some properties that lose money. There are some properties that do really well. So if you were to take the whole portfolio as a whole, I could probably survive off the top maybe 10 to 20% of the portfolio. And then if I were to only have maybe the bottom 30 to 40% of the portfolio, I would go bankrupt. So you kind of have to, you can't really look at it as, you know, you buy 3 houses and you're set. If you hit a home run on your first 2 or 3 deals, you might be fine. If you strike out on your first deal and you have a really bad deal, you could go bankrupt from that one deal. So you can't really look at it in that sense because no 2 deals are alike. It would be lovely if you could just say cookie cutter, you know, every house you buy, you're going to make $1,000. So, you know, you just need to buy 5 houses. But in reality, it just never works that way. But with that said, I would say if you think outside the box, you can do it a lot sooner than you think you can, actually. For example, if you buy a regular rental property where I live, back when I was first starting to buy them, I could probably have rented the property out for, I don't know, a couple $100 profit, maybe $200 to $300, if that. But then I didn't really want to spend that much time. I would have needed, you know, 20 or 30 houses to be able to replace my income. And so I thought outside the box and I started renting the rooms out individually. And I was able to go from, you know, instead of making $200-300 a property, I was making $200 to $2,500 a property. So you don't need too many of those before you're able to replace a 6-figure income. So I would say in anything you do, try and think outside the box and see if you can, you know, maximize your time with what you've got. Now, the flip side of that is it takes a lot more time to do what I was doing, so it doesn't scale very well. So if you have a lot more money than you have time, this is what I did was not a smart business decision. But if you have a lot of time and very little money, then you can take on projects like that pay much more but have a little bit more micromanagement involved. So it's all relative, I guess, is a long story short. Asks, what is the long-term perspective of this platform? That's a tough one. I'm definitely not technical enough to make an intelligent comment on AI. I can say this though, I do try and keep up with the trends because it's changing so fast. So that's pretty interesting, and I don't want to be left behind. So as far as where it's going to go, I have no clue. Could you imagine doing something different for a living? Absolutely. There's a lot of things that I would love to have done in my lifetime, and I still have time to do it, but we'll see. I do make a lot of guide content because I do enjoy tutoring people. I love to teach. I could see myself being a teacher when I get older and you know, maybe quote unquote retired. So maybe something like that. We'll see. It would definitely not be for the money. It would just be something that interests me. And as far as business goes, I will always be interested in real estate and will probably continue to transact in it and hold wealth in it. YouTube wise, I will probably keep the gaming channel running as long as it's viable. I would like to at some point try to branch out into other topics like a finance channel or talking about previous work stuff. You know, I've got a lot of cool stories from the car business that are pretty, I think a lot of people would be interested to hear them. Just other stuff like that. So yeah, I could see myself doing different types of channels and whatnot. Joakim asks, what are the highs and lows along the way from quitting your day job to reaching 100,000 subs? Tough question. I can't really think of all the things that have happened along the way to really pick like the best and the worst. So I'll try and pick some of the ones that stand out to me. I would say one of the highs in the car business, when I first left school, I really wanted to be a manager, but they didn't have a position open. So I had to be just a regular salesperson, and I wanted to try and get that management position as soon as I could. So I just outperformed everybody. They were doing like 8 cars a month. I was doing 20 to 30 cars a month. I was doing a bunch of extra tasks, and I made sure that my boss's boss knew that I was doing those to show that I was competent at what he was doing, and hopefully show that he was incompetent. And within 3 months, I think it was it was about 3 months, he got fired and I got promoted to his position. Now that might come across as like, oh, you're kind of an asshole, and that's not entirely inaccurate necessarily. The personality type that you have to succeed in the car business is very different than what you need to be succeed in real estate or, you know, run a YouTube channel. So to say that I was a different person back then would not be accurate. I'm still the same person, but different parts of my personality are amplified depending on what I'm trying to do. And I'm definitely not proud of a lot of the stuff I did in the car business, and that's why I really enjoy real estate and I really love doing YouTube, because you don't have to be that type of person to succeed, and I don't necessarily enjoy it, especially retrospectively, you know. So I guess it's kind of a high and a low, right? It's like there's all these things. I got all kinds of stories from the car business where, you know, in the moment it was like very, very triumphant, and then you think about it afterwards like, oh man, I'm a douchebag. I'm a complete scumbag. So yeah, I would say that's one of them. Buying my first house, I think I did it like 6 months after graduating college, and I graduated college with literally, it was like $200-300 in my bank account, and I had 25 grand in student loans. So I was broke, and I went from nothing, and I put my plan in place. And this is like a 6-year-long plan from, you know, schooling, studying on how to buy real estate on that whole time, and then, you know, picking a job that would pay well all the way up into buying that first house and putting tenants in there that are paying, and then putting that rent money in my bank account. It was really, really fulfilling experience. So that was definitely one of the highs. I can't say I have a whole lot of highs with YouTube. I just didn't know enough about the business to know, you know, what I should be proud of or not proud of. So it's just kind of been one of those, you know, it is what it is. I really enjoy it, but I don't know anything that I should be proud of or, you know, any of the lows necessarily. So yeah, YouTube, it's kind of hard to say. As far as lows, I think I mentioned it before, you know, losing a ton of money in a bad business deal, that was painful. That was definitely one of the lows. Lost a lot of sleep over that, caused a little bit of issues with the, you know, family stress because of that too. So that was definitely one of the biggest lows. I had a bad business partnership and lost a lot of money, and you know, almost went bankrupt from that, but clawed my way back out of it. Pretty proud of that too. So yeah, there's so many things, man. It's hard to answer that. I would say I would have to sit down and really write them down chronologically, and then it would probably jog a lot of things that come to mind, but those are the things that really stand out. Eogon Smith asks, what is a phrase, saying, quote, or piece of advice that has influenced you or you often think about? There's a few, but the main one that comes to my mind is happiness is not getting everything you want, but wanting everything you already have. And I learned this pretty early on, and I think it really made a big difference, especially as it pertains to money. I've been been able to build a very comfortable life with very little money. You know, I was living off of ramen noodles and eggs and vegetables, you know, all stuff that'd be very cheap, crappy car, you know, all that stuff. I found happiness in those moments, even when I didn't have nice stuff. And it allowed me to focus on all these other things because I wasn't always striving for, you know, a nice car or a huge house or, you know, whatever, any of those things that you're looking for. So it allowed me to really focus on the things that interested me rather than focusing on things that I have to so that I could get those nicer things. And it just so happened that the things that I was interested in also made me a lot of money. So it kind of worked out in the end. But if I were to take everything away and I would go back to square one, I would still be happy because as long as I have this the basic stuff that I was talking about back when I had $0 in my bank account, I could totally be happy. And, you know, another thing that works out for is, you know, with you know, women or your spouse or however you want to say it. There's a lot of people that think, you know, after they get married a few years, like, oh, yeah, I could probably find a better wife. Maybe I'll do that. They always think the grass is greener on the other side. But if you can find happiness with what you already have, you don't even consider looking elsewhere, and you just make do with what you got. You're happy. Why would you need to even consider or entertain that thought? So just something that I would say changed my life for the better, and hopefully it helps somebody out there too. Brad Simon asks, what is the worst game you ever bought and played? That is a tough one. There's one game that I remember playing that was just awful. I don't remember the full name. It was something King Arthur or something. It was probably 10 or 15 years ago, and it's still sitting in my Steam library, and I think I have like 3 hours on it, and it was terrible. Another one, I played so much of the X series, the X3 Albion Prelude and X3 Terran Conflict. Amazing games. I probably have about 2,000 hours between those two games, and I love the games. And then X4 came out, and I played it right when it first came out, and I hated it. It was so bad. I would say those two are probably the two that stand out in my mind. Just a footnote on that, X4 has gone through quite a few patches, and it seems like it's a lot better. I actually thought about covering it on the channel recently, but I didn't. But yeah, it's better now, but it was so bad when it first came out. That one really stood out to me. What is your favorite game of all time and why? That is a really, really tough question. I would probably have to break it into different phases of my life because I can't really think back of one and say, oh, this was objectively better than the other ones, but there are certain times in my life where one game would dominate over the others. So when I was really young, I would say probably The Legends of Zelda, the very first Nintendo, the NES one, you know, the one that come in the gold cartridge. That was probably my favorite game at that time. The next favorite game was definitely another Zelda one. It was the one on SNES, the first one that came out on SNES. That was such a fun game. Probably Final Fantasy 3 as well. That one was really good at that time. Nothing else really stands out for those early days. Those three in particular have always stuck with me. As I've gotten older, some of the best games that I've ever played, I have to, there's so many, it would be hard to list them all, but the one that really stands out is Supreme Commander. I also played Total Annihilation. That one was pretty good, but I think I was a little too young to really understand everything when it first came out. And its predecessor, Supreme Commander, I absolutely loved that game. Like if I could have played that competitively as a profession, 100% I would have given up everything to do it. I loved that game. It was so much fun. Aside from that, Dota 2 was one of my favorite games too. As far as one of the recent games that I played, I have like almost 6,000 hours on it. It's like 55 or 5,600 hours. Really fun game, but the amount of toxic people in there kind of killed it for me. So that one, when you have a good team, I would say probably that one. Bannerlord's pretty far up there. EU4's up there, but I wouldn't say those are my favorite of all time. Small City asks, what is your favorite game story / narrative wise, as opposed to complex games with a lot of statistics? Good question. I would say as far as the storyline goes, Kingdom Come Deliverance probably takes the cake for like a recent game. And if I had to think back on an older game that had a really good story, something from the Final Fantasy series. Final Fantasy 3, I don't know, maybe it's 6, I can't remember. Whatever the American version was, the one that had, you know, the intro, you're walking with your mech suit in the snow. I think that's 3. But that one just sticks out to me as the storyline is so amazing. Like I was a kid when I played that. I was in elementary school, and I still remember so many parts of that storyline. It's still stuck with me today. But I can tell you, I've watched movies like 2-3 months ago, and I don't remember anything that happened in those movies. So those are the ones that really stick out to me as like, man, that was such an amazing story. Triptide HD asks, if all the fans were up for it, would there be any other games you really want to make a video on? That is a tough one. There's definitely a lot of games that I would like to cover, but I know it wouldn't be economically viable. I would love to stream some Dota 2 one of these days, just because it's, I talked about it briefly in a previous question, that people are super toxic on it, but I still love playing it. And I think that'd be kind of a fun one because I I like to troll people too. Like if they're being an a-hole, I could totally do it back to them like 10 times worse. So that type of stuff might be kind of fun. There's other games that are kind of older, like the X series. I mentioned that before, or like Supreme Commander. I would love to do videos on those, some of those older games, almost like what Seth Zintac does. His videos cover older games like game reviews. I think doing a couple of those would be interesting, although it wouldn't really line up with the niche that I'm in. So I don't know, maybe it wouldn't make sense to do it, but maybe I'll try it one of these days. We'll see. Brat asks, do you ever play games without trying to min-max and analyze them? So it probably comes across in my videos that I analyze everything to death, and there's a little bit of truth to that, but I would say the vast majority of the time I actually just play games to have fun. I do enjoy a little bit of min-maxing from time to time, especially in some of these RPG type games, but I would say the vast majority of my gaming, if you call it your quote-unquote gaming career, you know, from regular Nintendo all the way up to present day, the vast majority of the games I just played for fun. And maybe I would make mental notes and trying to figure out a little bit of min-maxing in my head, but I wouldn't really pull out spreadsheets or databases and whatnot. That was something that's a little bit more recent and specific to YouTube, because I'm of the philosophy that I would like to show you rather than just telling you something. You know, if I show you the data, it backs up the claims that I'm making. Antacid Canada asks, how did you settle on Bannerlord, and did you also play Warband? So I never played Warband. I found out Bannerlord randomly through, I think it was a YouTube video, and I started playing it. I didn't really know that I wanted to cover Bannerlord. I actually was going to start the channel as EU4 content, and it was like maybe a week or two before I started, I changed my mind and settled on Bannerlord just because I felt like there was a lot more competition with EU4, and there really wasn't anything on Bannerlord, and I did enjoy the game. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it more than EU4, but I grew to love it quite a bit after covering it the way that I did, so that's kind of how that came about. Veron07 asks, what made you start recording and posting videos? So I thought about starting a YouTube channel at a couple different points. Back when Escape from Tarkov came out in 2017, I bought it like the second or third day it came out. That was such a fun game, and I really thought about starting a channel at that point, but I decided not to because I had a lot going on. And a couple of the points, I think once during the beginning of COVID, I thought about doing it, but again, I was still kind of busy and kind of in damage control point. Really the main catalyst, once I had mentioned in a previous question that I lost a bunch of money in a bad business deal. And in real estate, if you don't have a whole lot of money to splash around with, you can't really do a whole lot. So you're just kind of sitting there not doing much. And I really wanted to keep busy and keep building a business. I had done e-commerce. I hated it. So I sold that business off. I had done a bunch of other things. And so I figured, you know, YouTube checks a lot of the boxes that I needed it to. You can make decent money eventually. You can do it from home. So I could stay close to my kids, play with them, help my wife watch them, all that stuff. So it just checked a lot of boxes. And it was just the right time. It was timing and just the setup of it all. So that's, I would say, the main reason why I started doing it. And then the follow-up question, what motivates you to keep posting so regularly? I would say the only reason I'm still doing YouTube to this day is because I really do enjoy it. It's one of those things where you have to put so much of your time and effort and your heart and soul, whatever you want to call it. You have to put all that into these videos and this business in general, that if you don't enjoy it, you could probably push really hard for a year, you know, a couple months, whatever, but eventually it's just going to wear on you. It's kind of like when you have one of those jobs where you just absolutely hate waking up on that Monday morning and thinking, oh man, I don't want to go to work. I hate my life. I hate this job. YouTube 100% can be that job. If you enjoy it, it's not. But if you don't enjoy it, it will definitely be that. And that's why I kind of picked the topic that I picked. I love playing games. I will never get tired of playing video games. So even if I wasn't making a whole lot of money and I just needed a hobby, I would definitely be doing this channel. So yeah, I would say what keeps me motivated, just because it's something that I really enjoy doing. If it ever stops being interesting to me, I may scale it back to a point where I can still enjoy it, or I'll stop it altogether. But I don't see that happening. I really enjoy it. DJ Curry asked a couple questions that I already answered previously, so I'll try and cut to some of the ones that I didn't cover yet. Did you come looking for success on YouTube? Yeah, so I started my YouTube channel specifically as a business, not as a hobby, not for fun, not as like an artistic outlet, specifically as a business to make money. Now, with that said, I would not be running a YouTube channel still if it was just for the money. It's one of those businesses where if you don't enjoy it, it can be as soul crushing as the worst job you've ever had. 100% I would not do it if I didn't enjoy it. If I was covering topics that I didn't enjoy, I would absolutely hate YouTube. So I can't run any type of channel. I already know myself. I would hate if I had to do something else. But gaming, maybe if I did like investing or business, I could totally do that, no problem. I enjoy it. it, but other topics, it would definitely not work necessarily. And then the last part, were you inspired by other YouTubers when you were younger? So I'm in my late 30s, and YouTube didn't really come to fruition until I would say maybe when I was in my 20s, like mid 20s. So it wasn't really a childhood thing. And when YouTube was starting to pick up steam, I was really busy with finishing school and work, and I didn't really spend time on the internet much other than just working and building businesses. So I wouldn't say anybody inspired me. Now, before I started my channel, I did model my first couple of videos off of a small YouTuber. His name is IcePire. He makes EU4 content, and there's one video specifically that I took notes on when I was doing my videos, before I made my first video rather. It's an EU4 Mughal Empire World Conquest guide, and I think he broke it up into like 3 different parts. But basically, you know, he had like a roadmap with timestamps in the beginning. He had very logical steps for how you go A, B, and C, and then a lot of his videos he had a little bonus section at the end. And so I just kind of copied his format. Obviously I changed it to fit the Bannerlord video style, but yeah, that was kind of my inspiration for how I started making videos. Obviously I've grown away from that, but shout out to him. You know, he makes really good videos, and his channel's not as big as I feel like it should be. His guides were incredible. So Frankie asks, what's your daily routine as a YouTuber? Now this is a tough one. I don't have a daily routine, specifically because having kids, it's almost impossible. Now if I were to have a channel 5 years ago before I had kids, it would be a totally different answer. I'm very regimented. I like to schedule stuff out and block my time out. I've tried it before and it just does not work. It's impossible to schedule when you can do certain things because you don't know what your kids are going to be doing. Sometimes they nap on time, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they eat lunch at 12, sometimes they eat lunch at 2:30, sometimes they wake up from the nap at 5, sometimes they don't nap, sometimes they wake up at 6 in the morning, etc., etc. So it's almost impossible to schedule anything out. And it's also really difficult to work from home when you have kids. There are times and days where I can get maybe 5 or 10 minutes of work done, and then I have to stop to go help with something. You know, kids screaming and he pooped, and the other kids getting into the cabinets, and so I got to go down and help my wife. So there's all sorts of stuff that just make it really, really difficult to plan or schedule things out. Generally, the most reliable time to get work done is either in the early morning before they wake up, which doesn't happen because they wake up before I do half the time because they're just crazy, or when they nap during the afternoon, and sometimes they don't nap. But if they nap, I can usually get a solid 2 hours in with no interruptions. And then again, I can get a little bit of work done between lunch and dinner, but usually, you know, meals take forever because my kids hate to eat. So that's a struggle. And then bath time, it's just bad, man. And then at nighttime, I can usually get a little bit of work done when they're getting ready for bed or sleeping. So it's tough. I wish I had a better answer for you. And once they get older, I would love to have a routine and share it with you. But up until that point, it's just, you know, embracing the chaos, man. Raven Vega and Damn I'm Bored asked kind of similar questions, so I'm going to lump these two together. Are you worried about burnout? So I see burnout in 2 different ways. There's the burnout where you're working too much, you know, too many hours, and there's the burnout where you're just doing the same thing too many times in a row. Me personally, I do not burn out from working too much. My personality is I get obsessed with certain things, and I have to do it all the time. I have to think about it all the time. That's all I want to do. That's all I want to think about. And for me, YouTube is like that. I don't burn out if I spend a lot of time. Like I can think back, I've been doing this for almost 2 years now, the YouTube channel, and I haven't taken a single day off unless it was to, you know, move or rehab a house or whatever. It's something non-YouTube related. When I'm working on YouTube, I haven't taken a single day off. You know, 8 to 12 hours a day, no problem. But if I have to do the same thing over and over, like if I had to make 20 guides in a row and I didn't have the opportunity to do anything else, for sure that's burnout. So what I try to do is I skip from, you know, maybe I do a let's play, and then I'll do a handful of guides, and then I'll do a tactics video, and then maybe I'll try and throw in a heavily edited video, and I'll kind of switch it up so that I don't get bored of doing that same type of content. You know, if I do too many of it in a row, I will get bored of it, and then if I do something else, I'll be like, oh, I kind of miss doing the guides, so I'm going to go back and do a guide. So I try and set myself up like that. Anyway, it's worked so far for me, but we'll see. That can change. And then the last part, you're pumping out daily quality content. Do you feel like you might burn out at some point? Not really. No, I don't think burnout's an issue. I never had that issue when I was working in the car business or the real estate or any of the other businesses. Like I said, as long as I enjoy it, it's not even possible for me to burn out. If I don't enjoy it, 100% I'll burn out really quickly. So far I haven't gotten there yet. So hopefully that doesn't happen. Herr Waffenhandel asks, why choose Bannerlord as the main game for your channel? And I know I kind of answered this in a previous section, but I want to approach it from a little bit different angle in this one. So I actually didn't really pick Bannerlord until the very end. I know I mentioned that I was thinking about covering EU4 instead. I can't really tell you why why I picked Bannerlord. I can't really think of a moment where it just clicked. I know there was some rationale behind it, like there weren't as many big channels covering Bannerlord, and there were a lot of channels covering EU4. But really, you know, I don't shy away from competition too much. It doesn't concern me. Like, I'll work my butt off until I beat everybody. I don't really care. But in this sense, I don't know. I mean, there's times where I've done that before, where I would make a really big decision, and I can't really tell you why. It's just like a gut decision. So yeah, I don't know. It's Orca Craft asks a couple of things I already answered, but the second part I did not get to. So what is your ultimate dream with YouTube? That's a interesting question. So when I first formulated an idea for starting a YouTube channel, I approached it from specifically a business standpoint, not so much, you know, creative or artistic. So I thought about what would do really well. And I know guide content does really well if you're starting out. Obviously covering one game is not going to be a good plan for long term. So my ultimate dream would be to cover multiple games per year, maybe doing, you know, 10 to 15 games each year on the channel, and also host all those guides on a website, making it much easier to find. Because right now, if you go to, you know, a playlist, and let's say I was covering 10 or 15 different games, or let's say 5 years from now, and I have 50 games, how the hell are you going to find all those playlists? So I thought of this idea to come up with a website so you can organize everything. So if there's a specific game that you want to see if I've made a guide for, you can just go on there and easily find it with an easy search, because YouTube playlists and searching on YouTube channel is really kind of a pain. But then also the nice thing about the website is you can host other things that you can't host on YouTube. So for example, all those databases, you can host all those there. You can put, you know, banner ads so you can make some revenue from it. There's a lot of things that you can do. So my dream would to have kind of like a vertically integrated business with a YouTube channel as the base, a website, you know, one step up, having different types of merchandise, which obviously sponsorships, all that stuff. But I haven't gotten there. I really want to focus on the content and building a loyal base of viewers. And then at some point I'll worry about monetizing more. That's kind of the ultimate dream. So Bingus asks, what are your plans for the future when you can fully focus full-time on YouTube? And I know I touched on this previously, but I want to answer this in a little bit different way. So I actually started YouTube spending full-time on it. So, you know, I was doing 50, 60 hours a week on YouTube. And the only reason I'm able to do that is because I do have other businesses that they don't require a ton of extra work for me to do. And they were making enough money to pay all the bills and support the family and whatnot. YouTube itself, what I'm trying to do here is build up the income from YouTube to be able to overtake what I'm making in the other businesses. And then at that point, I would like to hire somebody to run those other businesses for me, and I'll be able to justify their salary. Like right now, if I paid somebody to do those, they'd be eating up a big chunk of what is being used to pay the bills, and I would be going negative, and I don't want to do that. So at that point, once that happens, then I'll be able to focus 100% on YouTube. So instead of having a full-time on YouTube, I'll be double full-time on YouTube because I love to work a ton of hours. You can't get me away from work, man. I get bored if I have time off. So the other part of your question, do you have any plans for larger scale videos that wouldn't be possible with your current schedule? Now, I see this in two different ways. Larger scale in the sense that I want to do more quantity of videos covering more games. And the other sense is that I want to do higher quality videos. So, you know, videos that maybe a 30 or 40 minute heavily edited story-based video. I want to do both of those. Now, I've already started to implement some things on the first aspect, so doing more quantity. I'm going to start working with other channels, other YouTubers, starting to collaborate on some guides that I can maybe spend, you know, 20 or 30% of my time doing that, and then they can spend their 70% of the time doing it, and then they can take, you know, a certain percentage of the revenue, and it'll work out for both parties. So the channel can continue to grow. I can still monitor everything and making sure the tests are done properly, the data's solid, the voiceover's there, I do the scripting, stuff like that. And then that way I can cover more games. And the flip side is doing higher production quality videos. I would love to do those. And two things, I'm a little nervous because I know how much time goes into it, and I know what I could do if I wasn't doing those. So for example, one heavily edited video could equal, you know, 4 or 5 guides. So if that video doesn't get 4 or 5 times the views, it's like, wait, why didn't I just do 4 or 5 guides? So it's kind of a balancing act. I know at some point you just have to bite the bullet and do it, but yeah, it's something that I struggle with, but we'll see what happens. And then you asked, if you don't mind, what would these video ideas entail? I would definitely say just bigger ideas. So like taking an entire campaign, you know, 50, 60 hours of work, and then condensing it down into a 20 or 30 minute video, and spending, you know, 100 hours editing it, just doing something on a really big scale. There's a couple people that you can you can look to that I can think of that would be a similar style. Reggie Games. Reggie he puts out some amazing content. I would love to make some videos like that. Martincito Pants. I don't particularly care for the games that he plays, but his editing style and his storytelling is amazing. So things along those lines. Girder Games asks, how has YouTube influenced your perspective on the world? So two ways to look at this question. Number one is the platform itself, and I think YouTube as a platform is incredible. It's done a lot of good. So I can just say from personal experience, there's a lot of things that I was interested in that I would have had a hard time finding anything relevant on if it weren't for YouTube. So history documentaries, finding how-to videos, tutorials. I didn't know anything about editing videos, editing pictures. I knew a little bit of editing pictures because I ran an Amazon store for several years, but like actual editing pictures to make it look good rather than just, you know, taking a background out. I didn't know anything about any of that stuff. Storytelling. So these are all things that I had to learn from scratch. If I didn't have YouTube tutorials to show me how to do it, I would have been years behind the curve compared to where I am now. And it's all free. I didn't pay a penny for any of that stuff. So incredible, incredible. When it comes to disseminating information, obviously not all of it's useful, but you know, if you get the right stuff, it can be an incredible force for good. I'm sure there's bad stuff on here. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't really comment on that intelligently, you know, TikTok and shorts and all that stuff. But the other side is YouTube as a business. How has it influenced my perspective of the world? So I don't know about the world, but I would say more my world. So, you know, when you're looking to start a business, there's a lot of things that you have to keep in mind and kind of plan for. A couple things that come to mind is, you know, your business overhead. You have to worry about having enough money to run your business. You have to worry about distribution, whether you're selling a product or, you know, making food or a service or whatever. You have to find a way to get the product out to people. There's a lot of things that you have to keep in mind, and YouTube solves a lot of those right off the bat. So for example, your overhead is zero. You don't have to pay a penny to start a YouTube channel. You have to have a phone or a computer maybe at the minimum. Beyond that, you don't have to have employees. You don't have to pay for software. You can get all this stuff for free. Everything I've done up until this point, for the most part, aside from the computer itself, has been free. I didn't pay for my editor, my editing software, recording software. It's all free. So that is incredible from a business standpoint. Distribution, I mean, YouTube has billions and billions of views a year, probably even trillions actually. But anyways, their distribution is the best in the world, just about. So you don't really have to worry about finding customers. You just have to worry about capturing the existing customers. So it's, you know, it becomes a game of how do I get a good video idea with a thumbnail and a title. So it's a different challenge, but it's not the same as, you know, you're opening a burger stand and you need to get people through the door. It's much easier to run a YouTube channel in that sense and less scary than it would be to, you know, run a brick and mortar store. So there's a lot of things. And then also scalability. So for example, going back to the burger stand, if you were to, let's say your burger stand worked maximum efficiency, you were open 24/7 hour, you know, 24/7, you had an infinite line of customers and you could sell all the, you know, basically it took you maybe a minute to sell a burger. There's a point where you would max out and you could not physically do more. You would have to open up a second location. You'd have to expand. With YouTube, you can scale infinitely without really expanding anything. Like you could literally be a one-man person and expand your operation to as big as you need it to be. It's incredible. So that's one thing about business that is really scary. If you want to scale, you also scale your overhead and your expenses. So you can really run into problems. Whereas with YouTube, if you scale just a little bit, you know, maybe you hire an editor, you have a couple people help you with, you know, the day-to-day stuff. If you have a month where you don't make any money because your videos flopped, you don't have that big of an overhead. Whereas if you're trying to run a burger stand and you got 10 of these things, you got 10 employees or 15 employees at each location, your overhead is massive. So, you know, YouTube, from how to influence my perspective on the world, is these types of businesses are really appealing to me because they're very safe. I don't have to risk a whole lot of money. I don't have to risk a whole lot of overhead to really grow a big business. So from that point of view, I really look at this type of business different from, say, a brick and mortar or, you know, those other type of businesses. And I really lean towards these types for that specific reason. So I don't know. I probably rambled a bit there, but hopefully that answered it. Forsaken Scientist asks, kind of a long question, but the gist of it is, what is your biggest regret? I've watched a lot of YouTube interviews and they always get asked this, so I'm kind of prepared for this one specifically. But the biggest regret for sure is not starting a YouTube channel sooner. There's several times when I could have started one and I thought about doing it, but I didn't. When I was starting the real estate business, I thought that would have been a perfect time, kind of like what Graham Stephan did, you know, I could have gone through the whole process, you know, buying the houses, fixing them up, putting tenants, dealing with tenant problems. That would have been a really good time to do it. The other point in time was 2017 when Escape from Tarkov first came out. There were not a lot of channels covering it because it wasn't that popular of a game. And the channels that were covering it were kind of low effort. They were just kind of, you know, goofing off and having fun. And I think with the mindset that I have right now, if I was doing it back then in 2017, I'm extremely confident that I would have a channel that would be, you know, 10 times the size where I'm at right now. Especially going through COVID, a lot of channels just blew up through COVID, not because they particularly deserved it, but because there was a lack of content and, you know, oversaturation of people that were looking for content. So, you know, that would have been a really, really good way to take advantage. But, you know, I didn't do it. So it is what it is. Yeah, it's one of those things where there's things when I look back in life where I wish I'd done them. And there's other things where I thought about doing it and I did not. And I'm super glad that I didn't. So it's kind of like, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? You can't just do everything that you have an inkling for. So I don't know. It's just how life is, I guess. And there you have it. Almost an hour of answering questions and me rambling on for days at a time. Thank you again to everyone who's helped me get this channel up to this point. I'll see you on the next one.